Hey everyone, we are Caleb and Elaine from KEJ Productions, and today we're going to take you through some EQ post-production work.
Once you've captured good audio, you actually need to know how to manipulate it and manipulate it in a way where it sounds natural and it fits into your mix. So we hope this is of help to you, and let's get started. So we're gonna start with the audio spectrum. Personally, I like to divide it into 7 different parts. First one is what I would tend to call low bass. You sometimes may hear sub bass. If you're at a concert, you kind of hear like that boom boom on your chest. Generally, that's gonna be in this part of the frequency spectrum. The next part of the spectrum is between 60 and 250 hertz. If you're a musician, the bass player's typically gonna reside in that region. Same thing with like a kick drum on a drum set. Next to that is what we would call low mid-range. People just have a hard time hearing it. It takes a lot of training. Don't beat yourself up about it. Generally, I typically reach for these frequencies when I'm trying to get clarity. Okay, mid-range part of the spectrum. Think of that part of the spectrum being like a horn, okay? A car horn or a trumpet. Like it has presence, but it still has a little bit of roundness to it. In regards to a human vocal, that 1K range is where you get a lot of nasal sounds. If you're EQing a vocal and they just sound like like Pee Wee Herman, basically, like I'm gonna go and reach for 1K and pull it out. Next to that, we have the high mid range. Now this is where your presence is going to be, the top end of a clarinet or a saxophone. These instruments, including the human voice, really live in this 2 to 4K range. And then up from that, we have 4K to what I would characterize as maybe 7K. And this is where you get a lot of your sibilants, a lot of your consonants, your T's and S's. And then lastly, some people call it air, some people call it a sparkle. I kind of like that word. Some consonants live in this part of the spectrum as well. Breaths live in this part of the spectrum. You still need to have breath in a speaking voice, otherwise it sounds weird. So that's just a brief overview of the frequency spectrum. This is not something you learn overnight. Both Caleb and I have been doing this for over a decade. For you, I like to relate this to instruments because most people know what a saxophone sounds like. If you use those instruments to relate to the spectrum, it's a lot easier for you to know where to grab as you're manipulating track audio. So let's go ahead and talk about parameters of EQ. So right here, I have the F6 parametric EQ. I'm only using this one because you can actually see the parameters I'm talking about. So with gain, what I'm adjusting here is actually the dB. Generally, you're not gonna have to do more manipulation than 6 dB, boost or cut. The goal is to get clarity without manipulating to the point where they sound unrecognizable. You still want it to sound like that person. Generally, I'm gonna start with maybe 6 dB, but more often I end up boosting or cutting around 3 dB. If I'm boosting, it's even less than that. Sometimes it's like 1.5 dB. So next to that, we have frequency. So I'm using a fully parametric EQ, which means that I'm able to choose the frequency that I'm boosting or cutting. So here you can see as I sweep the spectrum that I can choose any frequency. I can also choose the Q or the bandwidth of the frequency that I manipulate. Not only can I cut 1K, but I can also choose how many of the frequencies around it cut alongside with it. I really try to avoid doing stuff like this, super narrow Q. Really what it boils down to is that I want this audio to sound natural, and if I'm recording it in a proper way, I shouldn't have to get too surgical with my EQ boosts and cuts. If I'm just trying to shape the sound and get some clarity, I'm gonna keep that Q pretty wide. Let's talk quickly about high pass and low pass filters. So doing a high pass filter, especially on speaking vocals, it's just gonna clean up your audio. It's gonna get rid of any unwanted frequencies in that lower spectrum. A A low pass filter basically just does the opposite. You can set it at a frequency, and anything above the frequency you set it at, it filters it out. I'll be honest with you, I really try to stay away from this filter, especially on vocal tracks because of what I mentioned earlier. There's life there. I don't want to kill that. People grab this because it's like, oh, I have wind noise, and then they take this thing and they jam it all the way down to 6 or 7K. You're killing all kinds of syllables and breath. So I really avoid that. I use other tools to deal with issues like that, which we will get to on other videos. We've been working in what we call a fully parametric EQ. This tool is the most flexible, and it's really what you need. There are other tools, such as the graphic EQ. I don't use it. I don't ever use it. I've just seen a lot of janky things. You can get yourself into the weeds so quick using this thing. You don't need to do crazy stuff like this. You know what I'm saying? Please don't do this. This is not what you need to do. Thanks for joining. Subscribe, like, share if this helped you, and we'll see you next time.